Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is if you have your natal Juno in the 8th house. And I'm going to talk about what Juno represents, but it really does illustrate how different astrologers can look at these influences in a different way. Because whenever I do certain types of universal readings for YouTube, like these are supposed to be informational, I do consult online sources because I want to make sure that I'm as thorough as possible. And you will see conflicting information in terms of what something represents. So if we talk about Juno, which is an asteroid, and everybody agrees that Juno can be the type of person that you want in a relationship. And I just want to say as an aside that we have to differentiate between what you want in a relationship compared to what you're attracted to, because that is a very important distinction. And that's where people sometimes get tripped up, where they assume if they're attracted to someone, oh yeah, this is a perfect person for me to build a relationship with, and it could be a complete disaster. But anyway, I went to one source that's called mysticalprophet.com, and I'm giving a shout out to a couple of sites here because I am going to incorporate their information in this reading. And the way that they characterized Juno is simply that this idea of partnership. So it's very, what we would see with Libra and or the 7th house in our own charts. How we regard committed partnerships, but not just. I'm sure that it's not necessarily just, they say long-term partnerships on here. So, yeah, they say partnerships of all kinds, committed partnerships of all kinds. And they even mention business dealings. So, yeah, that totally is like 7th house and Libra. But they don't, when I went to Cafe Astrology, they also talk about this idea of betrayal, and they mentioned that there's even with Juno that there's this, scorpionic, and they mention Venus, but you could say, and they say Libra, but Libra is ruled by Venus, but also Pluto, which rules Scorpio, so all of that combined. And so, about this idea of betrayal, this idea of well, and they have infidelity separately, but to me that's kind of redundant. But being fair, and so that kind of give and take, where one person is there's like balance, in other words, in the energy that people are giving and taking. So, I would have to say that I would go along with Cafe Astrology on that, where it's more descriptive. But I do like some of the things I was reading on mysticalprophet.com, so I'm going to incorporate these two influences from the chart. But obviously, I'm putting this in my own words, so you'll have to read those sites yourself if you want their exact words. So, I'm going to be doing all of the Juno signs. I've really just started these series, and I've kind of I'm dabbling, I'm going back and forth. But I like to do the placements that are the most, well, you could say the most popular, and because that's kind of fun. And I think the reason I did Juno in Scorpio, and now I'm doing Juno in the 8th house, which is the house that Scorpio rules. And I think that people are interested in that because their relationships are going to tend to be fraught with drama if they're not careful. And even if they are careful and mindful of the type of person that they want and the type of, well, I said person, but I mean the type of relationship that they want, that they are not being too indulgent in this intensity that the eighth house is all about. So the interesting thing about talking about house placement is that you can also talk about, okay, then what sign is Juno in? Because that adds another layer to it. So in other words, you can have Juno in the eighth house, but what about if it's in Gemini? Is the person going to be that intense? Well, it might modify it, but it can also create even more complications as far as I'm concerned, because then there's this abstract attitude. So, for instance, I haven't even done Juno in Gemini, but that might be something that's rather ambivalent when it comes to relationships. Maybe it's somebody who's commitment phobic because they might have that syndrome of the grass is greener somewhere else. But then they have it in the eighth house. So how does that all reconcile? And what about the other influences? The moon sign, I said Jupiter, Venus, those placements are important as well. So obviously I can't talk about all these different permutations, but what I can talk about is the idea of long-term relationships. I hesitate to use the word marriage. I may use it interchangeably, but I'm not suggesting that a legal marriage is the only legitimate long-term relationship when it comes to romantic relationships. So when Juno is in the eighth house, and we have to talk about what the eighth house represents. It's the house of Scorpio, so it's a house of intimacy. The eighth house is connected to sex, but it's connected to sex that is not like the fifth house, which is recreational sex, but it's coming from this bonding, this desire to bond with somebody. So that's one of the unfortunate connotations of the word intimacy, is that people or connections to that word is sex, because emotional intimacy, the eighth house is a water house because Scorpio is a water sign. So emotions are the name of the game in this house. And so when somebody has Juno here, regardless of what sign it's in, regardless of what the sun sign is of the person, they're not going to be satisfied with shallow relationships. Now, where it can get interesting is, depending on, like I said, what sign is Juno in? What sign is their Venus in? What sign is their sun sign? What sign is their moon sign? If they have air, they can be one of these people where they are very confused about why they get involved in the most, I wish I could find a synonym for intense, because it gets boring to keep saying intense, but why they keep having such intense relationships when they actually may be quite scared of intensity. They may try to run for the hills. Normally with any type of relationship that gets emotionally heavy, but for some reason they always find themselves there. And part of that is because anything less than that is not going to feel like they are really in a true relationship. There's going to be that sense of depth that they are looking for, which is like body and soul. And so like the Gemini person who may have Venus in Gemini, let's say it's really like doubling down with this kind of tendency, and they read in an astrology book that Venus in Gemini is somebody who's very flirtatious, and they're fickle in love, and yet they are scratching their heads. Maybe they have Juno in the 8th house. The 8th house can be shadow work, and I almost think that relationships for these people are a form of shadow work, where you're bearing your soul to somebody at the deepest level, and you are not afraid, or you're not like repelled at them doing the same for you, because it's like therapy. And actually, I think psychotherapy is a form of shadow work, but it's like you're each other's therapists in a way. And that one of the themes of the 8th house is transformation. It's the house of death. So of course death is the ultimate transformation, but what transformation really means is that we you could make the case that transformation is growth, where we started one place and we become, it's personal alchemy, but it can be growth. But the truth, I mean, rather than expansion, in terms of growth in that sense, it's more of an inner thing. So in other words, rather than, oh wow, I started this small business and now I have 3 branches of this business. It's really like an inside job. And being able to join forces with somebody who is not kind of like this mundane type of individual, but somebody who, for whatever reason, they help you to transform. That is one of the things. It's like very shamanistic. And so suffice it to say, this can be a incredibly spiritual union, even if we're not talking about some kind of, shared religious beliefs or anything like that. I'm not talking about any dogmatic thing. I'm talking about on the energetic level. Now, this particular site calls the 8th house the house of karma. And quite frankly, I do not hear that. I do not hear the 8th house referenced that way. I hear more of the 12th house, which is Pisces domain. But it makes sense because, Pluto is one of the rulers of the 8th, and I've heard Pluto is a karmic influence. So for sure, there might be some kind of bonds that you develop with somebody based on this sense that you have known each other before. And I think that this is true, but it doesn't have to be true 100% of the time, obviously. But sometimes people will look at somebody when they first meet them, and they will feel this sense of familiarity, and they will immediately feel like they are connected to that person. So that could be that past life recognition, obviously, or maybe they're even kind of prepped, like you're going to meet this person, and through dreams they may even know what that person's going to look like, and things of that nature. So of course, what comes along with karmic relationships can be these spiritual obligations, you could call them. And the thing is, like when we have soul contracts, I don't really know too much about these things, and I'm a little bit leery about really diving in deep with that, because I honestly believe, and I have actually heard spiritual teachers these days say that we are breaking soul contracts or karmic ties. Okay. And I resonate with that deeply, even though I don't know much about them to begin with, because I think that all of those things are forged based on old patterns and old, ways of thinking. Just like in this lifetime, we feel a sense of obligation towards others, maybe based on our our past with somebody. I'm talking about strictly in this lifetime. And then it can come a day. It's like if you're with a spouse and you feel obligated to that person for whatever reason. You feel like you owe something to them. Maybe they took you out of a bad situation and you got married, but then you decide that you don't really want to stay married, but you stay anyway because you feel like you're supposed to do so. It would be disloyal to leave, and yet at a certain time you may decide that I don't owe anybody anything. Everybody has responsibility to themselves, and they can't lean on other people and demand of them their undying support. So these kinds of, but it could be, I have heard the eighth house mentioned as soulmates. So, that's kind of in the same realm anyway, so it's all connected. So one of the things that I want to mention that is connected to the eighth house that I touched upon is sexuality. And I think it might have been somebody who was watching one of my videos, and they said that the eighth house is magical sex. Something to that effect, which I really liked that definition. Like there's tantric yoga, and the whole point is that the sex act is not merely for procreation. It's not merely for pleasure. It can be something that transcends just those kinds of things, which you could say are mundane, even though, of course, being responsible for creating life is anything but mundane and is very magical. But I'm talking about that it produces a child and a family and all those, and it's like kind of practical, because if people are treating it like I'm going to start a family. But what I'm saying is that sex can be a way of, it can be like a mystical practice. And this is what I was saying about tantric yoga, but there's, I don't know if that's the only form of it. But also, if you have other planets here, or maybe even, I don't know if Juno would necessarily indicate this, but sometimes people have planets here like Chiron, for instance, or, Saturn, Pluto. There's different planets that could suggest sexual abuse. And I could see this as being a way to heal that. So not just sex as a mystical act, but also as a healing. And this also applies on the emotional level when it comes to some kind of trauma. The eighth house is a house of trauma. I'm surprised. I haven't seen it here, but when I look at these sites, I kind of skim over things. But the eighth house is the house of trauma. So anything that is connected to, people's past and what they have dealt with. No, actually, they do mention trauma and being able to heal each other's wounds from the past. And I think this is a very powerful thing, quite frankly. And I don't think it shows up in the same way for everyone. I think actually for some people, just being loved at a deep level and an unconditional level can be extremely healing. I'm not talking, so in other words, it doesn't have to be these like psychotherapy sessions with your partner, but just the way that you behave in the relationship itself, that can be very healing. And something that is not quite very romantic or what I've been talking about is that the eighth house is shared resources. So this can be, which is interesting because the word merging, when we merge monies, like having a joint bank account, for instance, and a lot of people will say to you, oh, never do that. Always have your own bank account. And I think that that makes a lot of sense. But some people are very adamant about, like, no, I trust my partner, and that would be a lack of trust. You know, like, for instance, this issue of prenuptial agreements, if one of the partners has a significant amount of financial resources before the two people get married, they're often advised to get a prenup. And this Juno in the eighth house person, if you do have that situation going on, you may be very resistant to that because you feel it's almost like a test to you. Like you feel that if you were to do otherwise, if you were to get a prenup, if you were to get your own bank account, that it would show a lack of trust at the deepest level for your partner. And to you, that's the ultimate that you want to display, is that you have that trust. Because, yeah, that's another thing about Scorpio. People with Scorpio placements and eighth house placements is that there can be suspicion and lack of trust. And again, because this is the house that can indicate trauma, that is the culprit, where something has happened and then the person doesn't really trust that things will work out in a certain way, so they need to kind of be controlling the situation. So now I suppose it's possible based on other factors in the chart, and I would say one of the big ones can be, for instance, like a hard angle from Venus to Neptune, where the person doesn't perceive a romantic partner in a realistic way, or they have, Neptune in the fifth house, Neptune in the seventh house, something that is connected to deception and love, and that they may lack discernment, even though they want what this placement provides. And of course, that can lead to some of the issues that we associate, like, for instance, with Scorpio placements. And even even with all the good things that you could say about this, there could be excessive control that a person with this Juno placement tries to exert over their partner. And, again, you have to look at the different factors to see how intense this would be. That'll be interesting when I do Juno and Taurus. I don't think I've done that because that would be definite possessiveness. But because this is the house of Scorpio, that can also apply. And the thing is that it's going to vary from person to person. Not everybody will have this, because some people already have like an attitude about relationship that is much more freedom loving, freedom giving, and freedom demanding. So let's say your Juno is in Sagittarius in the 8th house, let's say your Juno is in Aquarius in the 8th, you may still want that gravitas, that depth, or that weightiness in relationship. not having a superficial thing, but you don't want the excessive baggage that goes along with it. I should have just said baggage, right? So, this is where the, being holistic about the chart comes in, because you can't just isolate things. Sometimes when I read comments, I think people are isolating their influences too much, and then they kind of get a little bit obsessive about it, where they're trying to fit it into the grand scheme of things, and it really isn't about isolating in one influence versus another. It's about I can't say that word, synthesizing, kind of smushing everything together and creating this influence. So anyway, that's what I have for you. I hope that this resonated. If you would like a personal reading, the link is below. Take care. Bye.